Welcome to Life After Divorce, episode 98. I'm your host, Leanne Linsky.
I'm the boyfriend.
Welcome back to another wonderful week of
Divorce.
Yes. Hey, we are back and we are excited to be here with you as always. And while you're tuning in, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. We want to hear from you. And feel free to check out the website at lifelafterdivorce.com. In fact, the new year is right around the corner. And I invite you to book a free one-on-one life coaching session with me. Why not jumpstart your new year and get it off right? I want to hear what your big dream is. I want to help you get there. So go ahead and book your session. You know.
So Leanne, I have a question.
I know you're looking at me.
Yeah, because I've always wondered about this. Why do people think that the new year is the big time to start something big in their life? It's just a day to me. It's like you go from December 31st to January 1st. It's another day. You get ready to go back to work. Why is that such a big stepping point for people to try to make changes in their life?
Probably because they just spent the holidays with their family.
Well, you look at the stats and about the gyms and things. Everyone, like, gym memberships are big, and then by 30 days, no one's going to the gym again. So they put all this effort into making a change in their life at the beginning of a year, but then it never. I don't know. Some people don't follow through with it, and it's like a false milestone in my sort of thinking.
It is in some regards, and some, I guess it's just a measurement of time, and it's to look back and reflect, what happened in this year. Where was I at the beginning, and how far have I come? Or how far have I not come? What happened? I mean, I don't know. It's a measurement of time that just we celebrate the ending of it, or maybe the bringing in the new year.
I think it's a terrible thing we do.
Whatever the reason is. But there's other reasons. Like when we think back to our year, we've had significant life-changing events occur, right?
Yeah, but it was just coincidence it happened in this past year.
It's just a coincidence, but part of life, right? But we've had numerous things happen in this past year that we probably didn't discuss on this podcast because it didn't have to do with our usual topics. But we've had a lot of significant changes in our life that made us step back and go, wait, change our course.
Which
our plans
brings me to my point is, like, when big things happen in your life, that's when you make changes or do reflections, not so much on time durations.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe for people who haven't had big things happen, New Year's seems like an appropriate place because that's the highlight of their year. For the rest of us who've had big things, it probably happens around that time, like a divorce, right?
Yeah, I wonder why you brought that up.
I don't know. Because I know after my divorces, especially after the second one, I had to really step back and go, let's reevaluate what's happening here. I, obviously need to take a closer look at what's happening in my life and what choices I'm making and things like that. And where do I go from here? Right? Because after a divorce, all of your previous plans and dreams are kind of shattered and broken. So it's a wide open space ahead of you. And it's a great time to really
reinvent yourself.
Yeah, right? Transform, evolve.
But again, that makes sense to me if it was after a big thing versus a day change or a year change, whatever.
It's much more, something life-changing. A life-changing event has probably more significance than just a time of a year. Right? So in this case, I'm excited because our guest this week, which is perfect for the end of the year also, because a lot of people even reflect on this more as a holidays approach, is how do I move on? Like in the past, we've talked a lot to people about how to get through a divorce. We've talked to how to manage and reduce stress during the holidays when you're going through this process. We've talked all about the beginning stages, knowing when you're going to get divorced. But what about really once the process is behind you, things are finalized, you get a little closure on it, and now you're looking ahead and going, where do I go from here? How do I move on? And today's guest actually just wrote a book about that. And the book was released on December 11th. I have a copy in my hands I'm very excited about. It's called Moving On, Redesigning Your Emotional, Financial, and Social Life After Divorce by David J. Glass. And David is very unique because not only is he an author, but he also checks off several other boxes for divorce.
So which boxes? Is he divorced?
Yes.
Yes, so he's divorced.
He's divorced. He is a family law attorney and former therapist.
So therapist and attorney.
And now author.
Wow.
And a divorcee. So not only is he an expert in the law field for this and for a therapist, and I mean, he kind of, from his own personal experience to his professional experience, brings a lot to the table in this book. And I'm really excited because Boyfriend, we had a great talk with him.
Yes, we
today.
did.
He's very extremely knowledgeable and articulate. I really like his approach to this whole thing on recreating his whole life.
I appreciated it.
Yes, you did,
Yes.
because you have that analytical mind and can appreciate research and logic. And I had to laugh because, this comes into play where we talk about, well, you know what? Let's let David talk about it. So without further ado, Dr. David Glass. Welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce podcast, David.
Thanks so much for having me today.
We're happy to have you here and in person. So the boyfriend's here too.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Good.
Yeah. So I'm excited because, so for our listeners, we were just talking while the boyfriend was setting us up and everything. But the awesome thing about David as our guest today is he checks all the boxes. So he's been divorced. You are an attorney. You were a therapist. And you're an author.
That's right. So now I've got...
Are your parents divorced?
No, my parents aren't divorced.
Okay, good. Well, good for them.
Right.
But glad we didn't have to check off that box.
Yeah.
It's like 4 huge things.
Yeah.
And so we want to talk to you because you just wrote a book that just came out on the 11th called Moving On. And it's redesigning your emotional, financial, and social life after divorce. So I'm really excited to get into that because there's so much to talk about. But I'm curious because you do check all these other boxes and you've been married and divorced. Were you an attorney at the time of your divorce?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I got into this. I was a psychology major undergraduate and intending to be a psychologist. And I had a mentor who told me in the undergraduate years, unless you subspecialized very quickly, you're going to have trouble getting a job and maintaining a career. There's too many psychologists out there. And so I found a program, there were 3 at the time, where you got your law degree and your psychology PhD at the same time. And they squeezed 5 years of PhD program and 3 years of law into a 5-year program. And so I applied to it. They took two of us. They take 2 people a year. And I got into the program, intending to then be a forensic psychologist and have this specialty in the intersection of the law and psychology. And as I went through the program, I thought I'd be a better lawyer, but had gotten into it to be a psychologist. And so my first job was as a psychologist, and it just didn't suit me. After 2 years, I went back to the last law firm I'd worked at, who had said to me, if you ever decide not to be a psychologist, come be a lawyer with us. And I called them up one day and they said, when can you get here? So
Really?
Yeah. So I spent a very short time as a psychologist, and then for the last 21 years, I've been practicing as a divorce lawyer.
Wow. So so I know this is not our typical kind of questions, but did you get a sense when you were in school that you wanted to go to the lawyer? Were you was that the pull to you a little more than the psychology?
It actually was. And so with a 5-year program, each summer I had to get an internship. So one summer I was working as a therapy intern. One summer I worked at this law firm that did family law. And it seemed like a perfect intersection between law and psychology, allowing me to use both areas of my learning. One summer I worked at the public defender. They had a mental health unit, and another one I did drug addiction, drug and alcohol addiction treatment. And I had a sense that I would be a really good attorney and I could probably be an okay psychologist. That was my sense coming out of it, but I'd gotten into it to be a psychologist in the first place. So I finished out that route. I got a job. I did my internship. I got a job as a psychologist, but sitting there and people would come in for 50 minutes and then I'd scratch notes for 10 minutes and the next person would come in. it was too sedentary for the way I work. And even the type of therapy I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy and this subtype called rational emotive therapy, which is it's a very aggressive type of therapy comparatively. It didn't allow me to be pushy enough to suit my personality. It's, as a therapist, you're letting people come along in their own time. You're trying to encourage them. And I just wanted to jump in and say, this is what you should do, and this is going to be good for you, and I can help solve your problems. That's not being a good therapist. But
that's being a good lawyer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Being especially a family law attorney, I can be as pushy as I want to be. And I think I need to be. And then if people don't take my advice, that's on them. And so it just fits better.
Wow.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had met your wife when you were an attorney or prior?
We met in law school.
Okay.
And she was just going, say just in quotes, just going to law school. And I was in the law school and in the medical school where I got my PhD. So she graduated before me. After she graduated, but before I graduated, we got married. We lived in Philadelphia for a number of years. We had 2 kids. And then 15 years ago, we moved out to Los Angeles. And then within about 5 years, we got divorced. And so that's maybe 10 years ago.
Wow. So you were together a total of
15
years. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 kids and a cross-country move. And
that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the girls were 3 and 6 months. And it was sort of a situation. We were happy living outside Philadelphia, but we came out to Los Angeles for a trip. Her sister had recently moved to Los Angeles, had married a big-time literary agent in Beverly Hills. And we were in the pool after Thanksgiving. And so if you're from the East Coast, you're normally playing touch football dressed up in hat and gloves on the street.
Yeah.
And here we're sitting in the pool, and I said offhandedly, boy, I could really live out here.
Mm-hmm.
And my then brother-in-law said, you could and you should. And he got on the phone and he made 2 appointments for me. He had been divorced twice at that point.
Right.
And he made 2 appointments for me on Friday after Thanksgiving to go meet with top divorce lawyers.
Oh my gosh.
And so I woke up on Black Friday and I bought a suit at Bloomingdale's and I made them tailor it for me on the spot. And I bought the belt and the shoes and I had to buy the whole outfit.
Yep.
Went to these 2 interviews. I got a job.
Wow.
We flew back, sold a house, and it just happened that quickly.
Wow.
And so before Thanksgiving, you didn't think about it at all. Thanksgiving, get a job on the Friday after Thanksgiving, and then you sell and move out here.
Right, and then we spent about a week really thinking about it, and I'm a fan of drawing charts, spreading out a big piece of paper and making blocks, pros and cons for each area.
Yep.
And the only reason to stay in Philadelphia was I had just made partner. And because as a family law attorney, your practice is local. Those are people who live around you. So I couldn't bring any of that business with me, and I'd have to start over.
Right.
But the California lifestyle, which I'd never been out here before then, just offered so much promise. And it's worked out amazingly.
And divorce is big business out here.
Right.
Yeah.
And I tell people it's like playing for the Milwaukee Brewers, and then right before the playoffs, you get called up to play for the Yankees, and they're going to the World Series. That's the switch from being a Philadelphia divorce lawyer to being a Beverly Hills divorce lawyer.
Yeah, that's a big change.
Yeah.
And a huge lifestyle change coming out here.
Oh, absolutely. And we, on the East Coast, everyone has a basement, a finished basement, and their kids play in the basement.
Yeah.
And we had a rainy fall, a wicked winter, a rainy spring, and there was a period of 7 months where we hadn't been outside with our children. And that's the way everyone lives. But when we moved out here, they were outside every day, and the girls learned to surf, and it's just an outdoor lifestyle that isn't possible in a lot of other places.
Yeah. Wow. And so then you're out here for 5 years and you go through your own divorce. Now, you're both attorneys. How did that go?
Yeah, and so I was an attorney. My ex-wife had transitioned into selling real estate by that point.
Okay. Good place to do real estate.
Yeah, and she's done really well. But over those 5 years that we were out here, we felt like we were growing apart, and we didn't argue, we didn't have fights, we didn't yell and scream in front of the kids. There was none of that going on. It's just that each year we did less and less, fewer things together. She would go exercise and I would go exercise. I would go out with some friends one night. She would go out with her friends the other night. And then I would take the girls, our daughters, to go do something. She would take another day and do them because we didn't enjoy doing things together. And so we finally sat down at the table and said, I'm not completely happy. She said she wasn't completely happy. we talked it through and just decided we could both be happier outside the marriage. And how can we make this work? And so it was a mature, amicable, and somewhat unusual way, unfortunately unusual way for people to get divorced, as opposed to having big fights and someone having an affair or arguing over money or whatever drives people into divorce.
Do you think that because of your experience as a divorce attorney, that played in her experience in law school and being an attorney for a while, that played into how you handled your own?
Oh, it absolutely played in from my point of view, that the people, the amount of stress and the time and then the wasted money going through litigated divorce is an absolute sin. And I just was never going to be part of that. There was no way I was going to go in front of the judges that I appear in front of as a professional with my own ridiculous case of who's going to keep the piano and when are we going to sell this house. It mostly falls down to petty stuff that people hold on to. And I was never going to do that. And my ex-wife is level-headed and an amazing business person. And she looked at it like a business transaction. All right, we've got these assets, we've got these kids, let's make a plan and let's live with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen divorces where they'll fight just for monetary. They'll fight over a $10,000 thing, but they'll spend $20,000 in lawyer fees to fight over that thing where you're just like, it doesn't make sense. Why don't you just figure out an amicable way to deal with it, save your money and move on?
Right.
But it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. Unfortunately, people's egos and their egos get involved and they want to win no matter what, or they want to punish the other party. And you never really punish the other party and you never really win in divorce court either. No one ever comes close to winning.
That's a big statement because I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Yeah. And in a lot of states, it requires a whole year of legal separation before you can actually file.
Right.
Which kind of drags people through the mud. Yeah. Because in that time, one person can move on and start dating and the other person's still struggling with a breakup because usually one person wants it more.
Right.
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 Or even if you both want it, if one person's moved on a little too quickly, the other person's hurt. So that's got to be tough too, because now you just have that, like I can't imagine being with somebody and being like, okay, we're done. But we're still together for another year and I still have to, like, that's.
Right. And that's, and when people come into me and they're thinking about divorce, the first thing I tell them is I'm not going to pressure you to do anything. This is informational. You've got to make your own decision. Yeah. But some people have a tough time making that pull the trigger decision. This is over, and I've got to then figure out what my next thing is. And I call it sitting in a puddle of mud. They keep sitting in the puddle that they're in, and it's not comfortable and it's not fun. But they don't know what's on the other side of that puddle, and so they won't get out of the puddle and figure out what's next.
Right.
And if they stand up and take a couple steps, they're going to be so much more comfortable just from not sitting in this puddle anymore, and they don't even know what's out there that they could be doing instead.
And do you ever have a situation, I'm kind of curious, because I love that the example that you're giving of sitting in a puddle of mud, because it's so true. Some people will just sit there for the longest time and until they're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Right.
And then I'm wondering, have you had someone they start taking those steps forward but then they change their mind? Because people don't realize they can always change their mind. Not the best thing for an attorney.
Right.
But
yeah, and in fact, it happens when people first come in to see me. I always ask them, have you tried everything possible to try and save your marriage? Not a lot of divorce lawyers do that. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, I'll have someone say, no, we've been arguing and we haven't tried to do anything. And I'll give them 2 or 3 very good couples therapists. And there's a lot of therapists out there, and there's certain ones who are excellent. And so maybe it happens 4 times a year. I give out that name. Most of the time they go through couples therapy and it doesn't work, and they're still back to get the divorce. But a couple times a year, I'll get a note 6-8 weeks later, we're in therapy, it seems to be working, thanks so much for your referral, and I never hear from them again.
That's good.
And so, yeah. And those are nice ones to hear about for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of curious because you wrote this book and you just did this, and it's all about moving on. And the cool thing about this is that it's not about the divorce process. And as an attorney, I mean, you're super familiar with that, and you could have easily chosen that topic and how to get a mediator or how to do high conflict resolution, those things. But you picked moving on, and I'm after the divorce is over. And I'm kind of curious about how that came about.
Right. And so for me, when I got divorced 10 years ago, the divorce part of it came very quickly. And then we sold the house, and I found myself living in an apartment with my daughters half the time. And so I was dad half the time, but then the other half the time, I didn't know what to do with myself. I hadn't been alone somewhere for a very long time. And so I did some research, and I couldn't find any books that focused on the first year or the first period of time after divorce. How do you reorganize your life? And so I sort of figured my way through, and I made some mistakes and some things I did well. But the first thing I did was I reached out to my social network, and on the nights that my daughters weren't with me, I had plans. One friend, I'd go over his house and we'd watch football because it was Thursday night football night. And another friend, we would go hiking on the Saturdays that I didn't have my daughters. And so it was keeping myself busy and reconnecting with a social life that I didn't have when I was married. So it was that experience of turning around and just assuming you can find a book on anything. And I couldn't find a book on the moving on part. How do you leave the unsuccessful past behind, turn around 180 degrees, and then figure out what am I going to do next?
Right.
And even now, and this is 10 years later, there are a few books. When I did my research a year ago before I started writing, there are a few books about this period, but they tend to be religious in nature, and they don't really get into the detail of looking at each aspect of your life, doing some critical problem solving and figuring out what you're going to do next.
Right. So I'm kind of wondering, boyfriend, you're thinking something.
I just find it interesting that no one's written a book about how to, like you said, critically look at each part of your life, be able to develop a plan, and then fix it and move on.
Right.
And that's, so you go over emotional, financial, and your social life. You cover everything.
Right. Each chapter of the book takes you through a different area of your life. And the first chapter I look at is your own emotional health.
Well, that's what you have to deal with after a divorce. Yeah.
And I'd been in therapy. I'd been in practice training therapy. I'd been in and out of therapy. I think it's the most amazing thing if you can go in and you can actually use the process to bounce ideas off of someone and fix yourself.
But that's tough. A lot of people are resistant to that.
Right.
So you have to be open to the idea that therapy can be helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
And also there's a stigma associated with it with a lot of people still. It's so much better now, but a lot of people wouldn't, that I even know, won't come out and say that they've been to therapy or are going to therapy, or they think that very few people are. So the idea, and I love what you said too, it's getting an objective feedback on stuff and to be able to better yourself. And I think that's like a missed point, because a lot of times people think there's something wrong with me.
Right.
It's not necessarily there's something wrong with you, but we can all stand some improvement, and being self-aware and kind of being more introspective, reflective, and how do I change behaviors? Because we don't even realize some of the behaviors we had built up over a lifetime that aren't serving us.
Right, absolutely. And some people say, well, I talked to my friend, or I talked to my father, or I talked to...
No.
It's not the same, and you're going to exhaust that person. If you're post-divorce or you're going through a divorce, you can't lean on one person who's not trained to spill all that stuff on. It's just not going to work out.
Right.
And so I got into therapy with I said I'm going to be in once a week therapy for a year, and I'm going to focus on what did I do wrong in my prior marriage. It was very easy at that point. I could make you a list. This is all the things my ex-wife did wrong.
Right.
That's easy for everyone to come up with that list. But the other list of how did I contribute to the dysfunction? What did I do to cause him or her to act that way? What did I do wrong in the process? That's what I wanted to know, because I didn't want to come out, then meet someone else
and do it again,
and do the same thing again. And divorce rates for first marriages are 55%, and second marriages are 65%, and third marriages are 75%, because people keep going out. They find often a newer version of the last person they had a relationship, and they play the same playbook, and guess what? It doesn't work out.
Right.
Yeah. And that's it. A lot of people are like, oh, I keep picking the same person. It's like, yeah, but I haven't changed.
Right.
So I can keep picking different people, but it doesn't matter as long as my behavior is the same.
Right. Yeah. My father gave a speech at my wedding to my wife. And he said, having a successful marriage isn't just about picking the right spouse; it's being the right spouse.
Yeah.
And that always just struck me as just the truest thing that was said at the whole wedding. It was a very short speech, but it's you've got to make yourself ready to be a good partner to someone else. It's not just picking a perfect partner.
Right.
Yeah. That's going to stick in my head. Because it is about being the right spouse.
Yeah.
It really, really is. And relationships take effort every day. And I'm kind of curious, like when you went through this process with your therapist, what was some of the most surprising things that came up?
Right. Well, I mean, an early surprising thing was we were just starting off getting into it. And for whatever reason, I described that the trunk of my car had all sorts of stuff. I had all sorts of sports equipment for my daughters. And actually, at that point, I hadn't formally separated. I had open house signs for my ex-wife in the trunk. I had everything in my trunk for anything that could possibly come up. And the therapist said, well, what's in the trunk for you? And it just stopped me completely short. And I was like, wow, I'm not exercising. I don't have any hobbies. I'm serving my daughters. I'm taking care of my soon-to-be ex-wife's business. I'm doing my own business. But what am I doing for myself?
Yeah.
And it forced me to start thinking about what do I want to do. And the first thing I did was I tried yoga. I'd never tried yoga. I joined a beach yoga class. I did it for a year. I was awful at it. After a year, I still couldn't touch my toes. I still couldn't do anything right. But it got me down to the beach in the mornings on Saturday morning with some other people.
Right.
And it was just doing something that was just for myself. I didn't bring my daughters, didn't bring any friends, just went and did it myself.
It's an hour of solitude, an hour of yourself. We enjoy that.
Yeah.
We started doing that also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still can't touch my toes.
Right.
I do everything wrong. But the idea, I totally get it. And what else did you find that you, and specifically, like, did you find yourself saying yes to a lot of things that you never considered you'd say yes to before? I
started thinking about, and again, as a therapist, I taught people problem solving. And basic problem solving is first recognizing that there's a problem. Mm-hmm. Then the second step is trying to generate as many alternative fixes for it as possible without editing yourself. So I'm going to come up with 10 or 12 possible solutions and not say, well, that wouldn't work, or that's silly, or that's ridiculous. And then look at each one of those 10 to 12 options and figure out, if I did option A, what would happen next? And go through each of those options. And naturally, one or two come to the top as the best solutions. And that forces you have to force yourself to slow down and really think about that.
Yeah, and people don't do that.
And I wasn't doing it for myself. I used to teach it as a therapist. I had told people to do it as a divorce attorney, but I wasn't doing it for myself. And so my therapist forced me to slow down. And in the session, well, what could you do? What else could you do? Any other options? And coming up with even ridiculous options just got the thing going.
Yeah. And I can see the boyfriend thinking, because now you're speaking his language. He's very much that analytical research, laying things out.
Yeah.
Right?
So it just makes sense. But a lot of people don't think of all the possibilities or everything how can I attack this problem? And then what are the outcomes of each of those strategies?
Right.
But that's a great way to live your life. And I think, as you stated, sometimes you don't do it for yourselves, but you do it for a job and other people.
Right.
And I think everyone does that.
Yeah. And you come last.
Yeah. Everyone.
So part of this first year post-divorce is putting yourself first. What would feel good to me? What would make me feel more happy? Mm-hmm. And even that problem-solving approach. I mean, people talk about kids who just react. The kid takes a toy from them and they hit. Yep. That's it. This kid always hits. Doesn't matter what's going on. And that's the way adults act too. They have one thing that they use in response to something. They get argumentative, or they start to bully, or they turn the story and make it about the other person and project all of their own nonsense onto someone else. And you've got to get past that first thing that you're going to do by slowing yourself down and figuring out what else could I do that would work better.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of, and that process takes the high emotion out of it.
Right.
Because now you're being more objective rather than subjective and not reacting. So then you can actually respond instead, which you're absolutely right. Because and so many people think it's just like, well, if he did that, I just have to heighten it, or I have to, it's about winning.
Right.
And instead, it's stepping back and looking at it like that. It's like, I like what you said. It's about what's best for me, not about everybody else.
Right.
So it kind of puts the focus back on you completely.
Oh yeah.
All of those steps. So
right. I had a client once whose ex-wife was just awful, and she'd always write these long, awful emails to him. and put him down and say he was doing everything wrong. And then he felt compelled to respond and say, no, I'm not. I'm doing things right and you're wrong. And we go back and forth. And I explained to him that his ex-wife liked that. She liked remaining engaged with him. She liked putting him down because then he would flip out, and she liked having him get angry.
Yeah.
And so I had to teach him just not to answer. And for a while, any email he got from his ex-wife, he would forward to me, and I would suggest a one-sentence response. I'm sorry you feel that way. I don't agree. That's it. Send that single, simple email. And she wasn't getting back what she expected to get back, and she
eventually stopped.
The behavior eventually stopped. Yep. And then after a while, he got good at it from seeing what I would do, and he learned how to do it himself. It's a not engaging. It's especially if you have someone who's, in quotes, crazy on the other side. The only way to win is not to play.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's different. The lottery, the only way to win is to play. The only way to win is not to play the game.
Yep.
You just say, I'm not going to do this.
Feeds off of the engagement
control
or that negative interaction. They feed off of that.
Right. And the facts don't matter and the results don't matter. It's just getting you to flip out makes them feel better. In a weird way, that's how they act. That's how they work.
So true. So you went through this process and you started going through the process of figuring out what was best for you. What were some of the things that surprised you the most that maybe you had been doing wrong?
Right. Interestingly, it was my own parenting that I made a big change in my own parenting. In the later years of my marriage, and so when I got divorced, my girls were 8 and 10. And I didn't realize it, but I had been what they're now calling a helicopter parent. I'd been too involved with my daughters because it felt good. I wasn't getting those good feelings from my ex-wife, but if I was very involved with my daughters, I got all sorts of positive feedback. Oh, thanks, Dad. You're a great dad, and this is so much fun, and all that stuff. That's easy to get that feedback, and so I was just on top of them. And going through therapy, like, for example, my older daughter used to be anxious about being late places. And so I just always made sure we were always early. Mm-hmm. And my therapist said, when you pick her up from school tomorrow, be 3 minutes late. And the next day, be 7 minutes late. And just see what happens. She'll realize that she got nervous, that you still showed up and nothing bad happened. And so I had to force myself to go the other direction. Mm. And I started giving my daughters a lot more space. And as a result, they came into themselves. And it was just in the nick of time before they became teenagers and then had to go through the whole process of figuring out who they were. And they hated me and they hated their mom. And then they loved me and they loved whatever was going on day to day, minute to minute. But I gave them that space to do that. And they've both grown up amazingly for it. And if I hadn't got divorced, I don't know that I would have stepped back like that.
Wow. Mm. So it's not only helped you, it's helped your daughters.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then one's a college sophomore and one's a high school junior, and just doing amazingly.
Yeah. What was the biggest thing that helped you get into a better emotional space? Was there any one thing that is kind of really helped you find some clarity?
It was just getting the message that divorce is a second chance. It's not. People talk about it's a mistake, and I think part of the reason I didn't get divorced as early as I should have was I was worried about admitting I'd made a mistake. I picked the wrong person. I didn't run my life the right way. This didn't work out. And you have to admit that to everyone when you get divorced. But getting past that admission, realizing that half the people in this world these days are getting divorced anyway, so it's not a unique problem. But then stepping a couple steps forward and then saying, now I can figure out whatever I want to do. I still have my daughters and I'm still going to live locally because they're still in school, but in my life, how do I want it to be? And so that was the biggest realization that divorce is a second chance, second chance at happiness.
Yeah. And I know, so in your book, once you were starting to heal emotionally and everything, and you looked at your social environment, what happened with that?
Right. And so socially, I had a bunch of friends that I'd had forever. Some of them knew me from the marriage. Some of them knew me before the marriage. And as I reached out to various people to try and fill my time, as I described before, I wasn't having as much fun as I wanted to. Some of the older friends, all we did was talk about the glory days from the Bruce Springsteen song, just talking about that stuff. And we never moved on to what was going on now. Or I had relatively shallow relationships with people. We were friendly. We enjoyed time with each other. But I didn't feel like I could talk to them about what was bothering me or how I wanted to change my business or how my then law partner wasn't the right law partner for me. Just whatever was going on, I didn't feel safe enough to talk to them about that. And so I just looked at all my friends and again, made a chart. And what am I getting from this relationship? What am I paying for in this relationship? What am I not getting from the relationship? And I winnowed down the breadth of my friends, the list of friends, to the people I was really enjoying and felt most comfortable with. And it's not like breaking up with someone. You just sort of, you stop responding, you don't go out as often, and then people sort of drift away. And when I explain that to other people about the book, or people have read that chapter, they're all bothered by it. How can you just get rid of your friends? And I always say to people, think about who you invited to your wedding if you're married 10 years ago, and who, if you were getting married today, what would your invite list be? And it's almost never, there's no one on the list other than mom, dad, Uncle Bert and Aunt Florence, whoever. But all the friends, even I'm remarried for 7 years now, the list of friends probably wouldn't even be close to the same. And so people come in and out of your life. They do it sort of fluidly, and you can allow this to happen. You don't have to hang on to friends just because they've been friends.
Just because you're on Facebook.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. And Facebook is another thing.
Right.
I still see those people, and I comment, and people I knew from high school back east.
Like you said, it wasn't you didn't say, I'm not your friend anymore. It wasn't like that. It was just, you just let it drift apart on your own. Yeah. Let it just follow its own course. And then, did you introduce new people into your life at that point?
Right. And then it was, as I'm meeting people, it was critically thinking, is this person a good match for me?
Yep.
And so I don't drink. I don't enjoy drinking. And so people who like going out to bars, they're off the list. I'm not going to go out to bars and sip my Diet Coke all night while they're getting drunk and they're having fun, but that's not fun for me.
Right.
That was an easy thing to do. Or people who weren't involved with families and are always looking for their next date. That's not me either.
Right.
And so I just thought about, what do I enjoy from people?
Yeah. And then also those people, like, what's some general mood and conversation every time I'm with you?
Right.
If it's negative and toxic, then why am I continuing this? Or if you're always late and frustrating me, why am I hanging on?
Right. And part of it was then meeting my wife, my girlfriend, fiance, now wife. And we went through the same process with all of our friends on either side. Who do we enjoy together? And we did the process again. And now we have a 2-year-old son. And so part of the process is, which of these other parents at the preschool class that we go to do we like, and who do we not really? Do you say hi to at the class? Yeah. Maybe go to coffee with, but we're really not going to get that involved with them. Yeah. But it's that consciousness of really thinking it through. Do I want to do this or not? As opposed to just whatever comes your way, you deal with. And it's an active way of being versus being passive.
Right.
And that passivity, I think, leads to people being burdened down with people they don't enjoy, or possessions they don't really need,
and lead you to unhappiness.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then breaking it down into pieces and looking at each piece. And if you look at the whole, what am I going to change? It's impossible. There's too many things. But if you look at a little corner called friends, and you look at a little piece called what's my financial life like?
Yeah.
And again, after divorce, someone's paying too much support. Someone's receiving not enough support. In my case, there was no support. We made the same amount of money, and it was no issue. But a lot of my clients deal with that, and I say, you've got to have a new budget. I know you used to spend this much money, but right now you receive this much money, or you make this much money and you send this much money to your ex. So that's your new budget. Just sit down and figure out a budget. And if you can't afford to stop at Starbucks every day on the way to work, then brew coffee at home. And there's sort of simple things you can do to fix your budget, but you got to focus on it. You got to write it down. I write everything down on paper. People do it on a computer too, but for me, just writing it down on paper makes it real, and then you can start crossing things out and checking things off.
Right. It's so helpful to kind of I like how your process is of reassessing things. It's not just being general, but you are very specific and methodical about it, which...
Well, like you said, you can't if you look at everything as a whole, it's just too burdensome.
Yeah.
You're just like, it's too much. You break it down and then just start looking at each piece. And going through a systematic process of decision making, you can tackle these things. Yeah. You can come up with solutions for yourself.
It's actually doable.
Oh yeah, sure. And I spread out a big piece of paper, and I made 6 blocks, and one was called home, and one was financial, and one was emotional, and one was friends, and one was a future partner. and I'm missing one, but there was another block there. And each block, I split it in half. And what do I like and what do I don't like? And so the what do I don't like become the problems that you're going to address. And then each one of those, because you focus on one little bullet point at a time. And once that's fixed, you move on to the next one. Right. And in fact, I advise people to fix the easiest thing first, because you build up some sort of momentum. Hey, I fixed this. It took a day.
I was productive. I did something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes you then want to do the next one, and you can build up to the harder things at feeling successful.
That's great. So in your book, do you have worksheets or examples of these charts?
Yeah, I have an example of the chart in the book. I tell people they can do it on an Excel spreadsheet, they can do it on paper, they can do it however they want.
Yeah.
But forcing
paper,
yourself to write it down.
I like the paper idea.
I do too. Yeah. I kind of am picturing you like, I'm laughing to myself because, like, let's say your friends listen to us on this podcast and they're like, hey, they made a chart. I wonder where we are as friends. And I can see them at your next gathering at your home, and they're like looking in your den. Do you have us on the wall?
Right. And I wish I'd saved it too. I didn't say I sort of worked through this whole chart, and when everything was checked off, I got rid of it. I wish I'd saved it, because that would be a neat thing to put into the appendix on the book, or just to have. I remember doing it though, so that was That's the funny. Important thing.
Does your wife now, does she do this kind of stuff with you?
We do. And part of the one of the later chapters is meeting a new partner, and eventually introducing them if you have an existing family, and doing all that stuff. But we made the decision after we'd been together for a while, we needed to get into couples counseling before we got married, and to figure out what are our issues, what are the things that we are going to argue about, where maybe we don't see eye to eye, where are we going to have tension, and let's work on it now. And fix those things now, early in the relationship, so that later on it doesn't become a problem.
Well, that's again to the active versus passive thing. So you actively addressed it before you made that next step, and then moved on.
Yeah, and it was murder. I mean, because I picked the toughest, strongest, maybe meanest, couples therapist we could find, because if you're fully committed to it, they're not just gonna allow you to keep coming. They're gonna work you through these things.
Right.
And some sessions I came out feeling like a wrung out rag, like I'd just been worked over. And some sessions my then fiance felt like, why was she always picking on me? But by the end of, it was 12 or 14 sessions, we had figured out what our issues were and then problem solved on them. For example, one issue was that I had my own law firm at the time. I wasn't part of a bigger firm. I had a small 3-attorney firm. And some months I would make a lot of money, and some months I'd make little money. And I had a line of credit, and I knew by the end of the year it'd all work out. Mm-hmm. And it made my then fiance nuts, because she'd say, well, what are you going to make this month? I said, I don't know. I'll wait. On the last day, I'm going to run the numbers and we'll see what I make. And but it'll all work out at the end. She couldn't deal with that. It made her too nervous. And so we made the decision that I was going to take my small firm and I was going to join a larger firm. Mm-hmm. Where I have a regular draw, and at the end of the year, I get a bonus. And so we based our budget on the regular draw. She knew I was going to get X amount of dollars each month. She knew what she made from her job, and now she didn't have to be nervous. Was there going to be enough money? Right. And that's a simple switch. But I had to hear it in therapy. She didn't tell me on the outside. It was in therapy. She said, I never know what you're going to make, and it makes me very nervous. And I know you're successful, and you've always made money, but not knowing makes me too nervous. And what can I change? We've brought out 10, 12 different things.
But the fact that you talked about it and you were open to, so she attack's probably a bad word, but if she brought this up outside of therapy and said, I don't trust how you make money, what are we going to do? Or I don't trust it. And then you could have taken that as a, I've been an attorney for
15 years. I make good money. Don't worry about it. That's sort of the typical response. And that probably was my response on the outside.
Yeah.
But getting into therapy where it's all boiled down to what's going on right in the room, as tough as it was. And then one of the, we generated 10 solutions. One of them was just continue living off of the line of credit and making sure you pay it off by the end of the year. But if that happened, it wasn't going to take away her anxiety.
Right.
So, yeah, I totally get it. It's like preventative therapy, right? I mean, is that a thing?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the term that's
but
used,
you could
but
use
that's
that,
what yeah, for sure. There were all sorts of things that sort of came up, and then we just figured out how we're going to deal with it. One of the things was, what do you do if you're both upset? She's upset about something. I come home, I'm upset about something. We both need the other person to take care of us in the downtime before we go back to work. How do you get through that if you're both upset? And if you don't have a system for how do you fix that, it becomes a competition. I'm more upset than you. I'm more tired than you. You slept more. Whatever you're going to argue
you're not
about.
Giving me what I need right now, and
yeah, and it becomes a competition.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in one of the sessions, the therapist said to us, "You sound like two bickering. You sound like a bickering brother and sister." And I was just like, "Wow!" After leaving that thing, I don't want to be a bickering brother and sister. I want to be a tight couple. And the therapist had a carved marble egg on her desk, and she said, "Only one of you can hold this egg at any given time. Only one of you can be upset and need the other person's problem. And so you've just got to figure out who's more upset. That's who's holding the egg right now. And the other person has to take care of them until they're fixed, until they're through whatever is bothering them. Then very quickly, you're going to switch the egg over to the other person. And now that person's going to turn around and take care of you." And so taking it out of competition and realizing that it'll all come around. Everything's going to be taken care of.
But in the real world, that's hard to do.
Yeah.
So do you guys just have to lay it out every day? I'm at this level kind of thing?
It's more that it's more recognizing when you have a problem. And so most days it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. But if we're feeling tense with each other and if it feels like we're about to have an argument and what are we arguing over? Whether she bought the milk on the way home, nonsense. There's very few things that are really worth arguing about, but that's what people spend their time on. It's recognizing that's a problem and then taking a step back and even saying to the other, who's going to hold the egg? Who's holding the egg right now? That sort of key phrase then gets us each to step back and figure it out and look at each other and say, all right, I'm going to take care of you or you're going to take care of me. And then we'll circle back after we get through that.
Yeah. And that kind of stuff takes constant communication on a daily basis.
Right.
Really.
Right. And it's impossible to be perfect at it.
Yep.
And that's actually another lesson from the book is that you're never going to be perfect at problem solving. And you're sometimes going to make the wrong selection. And it's not a crime and it's not a tragedy. You lay out your solutions, you think them through, you pick one. If it doesn't work, you come right back and you lay out your solutions again, or you come back with your second pick. Yep. And it's the making a decision, seeing it through. If it doesn't work, coming back and picking again. That's the key to being an effective problem solver, as opposed to saying, well, I made a choice, I got to stick with it. Right. And being stubborn about it.
Just know it's an experiment. And if things aren't working out,
learn and
right.
change. Yeah.
Right.
What would you say, like, when you were putting your book together, what are some of the key things that really stand out that you want to share with others? Like, you touch on several of the environments, but right. like, what were the key things?
Well, I mean, one of the keys that I tell all of my divorcing clients is that your new partner doesn't have to have a relationship with your ex-partner. A lot of people try to have their new wife at least be friendly with their ex-wife or correspond with them. Or I have two girls, and organizing their social life, you have to email back and forth with your ex and figure out who's going to take them this weekend and who's going to take them to soccer and all that other stuff. And it's natural to want your new partner to get involved. But if there is a person who's hard to deal with, don't do it. Just keep your new partner and your new life as separate as possible. Deal with your former life in the smallest, simplest way possible, but don't let it intrude on your new life.
That's a really good point.
That's something that's huge for people. And there's 1 in 100 couples who get divorced and are still friends and still do all the things together. They still have Thanksgiving together with all their new extended families, but it's 1 in 100. It doesn't happen. It shouldn't even be something that people aspire to. If it happens, that's great. Then you don't fit my book. You don't need my book. You figured it out.
It's very rare.
Right. But the 99 other people don't even try for that. I tell people, you want to be friendly with your ex-spouse. You don't have to be friends. You don't have to admire each other. You don't have to do things together. But if you're friendly, and it's based on the psych research, if you're friendly with your ex-spouse, that's how your children do well after divorce. And in fact, children of divorce whose parents are friendly do much better longitudinally than children who are in an intact marriage where their parents fight all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's just seeing two people who know how to react and don't act negatively. Mm-hmm. Kids get used to whatever situation you put them into.
Yep.
Right. Very true.
Or even another thing about kids, we sold our house. We had a big house. Neither of us was going to be able to afford it. We sold it, and I went into an apartment, and it had all the furniture. I didn't want to carry old furniture in. I didn't want to buy the black leather couch that most bachelors buy, and I wasn't going to be stuck with any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I was worried that my daughters were going to miss the house and our own pool. Now we have a shared community pool at this apartment we lived in, and we don't have a yard and all these other things. And I was really worried about how the girls were going to react. And the first week we were there, they were so thrilled that they learned that they could take the elevator up to the roof and ride their scooters around without me because it was a secure building. I said, go ahead, take the elevator up to the roof and ride your scooters and come on down when you're done and knock on the door. And they were so thrilled with that. Every friend would come over, come on, we're allowed to go up to the roof. We can ride our scooters up there. We can do whatever we want up there. We don't have to take my dad up there. And kids always find something.
Yep.
And to find special about where they just want to be with you. It doesn't matter whether you're in the house or in an apartment or you're downtown, you're here. They just want to be with you.
Right.
And a lot of my clients,
Yeah.
a lot of my clients get stuck on keeping the house. I want to keep the house for the children. And I always tell them they don't care. I promise you, your kids will be fine living wherever they are with you.
Yeah. I'm wondering, so now that you've been doing an attorney for some time now, but when people come to you, is there something that you do different with them because you have this very unique background? And that make it a different experience?
I try to make it a different experience. There's a subset of people who it doesn't matter how you deal with them. They've got their own idea and they're going to go through it and they're going to make the mistakes. Even if you warn them, even if you put up a big sign, even if you put up a roadblock, they're still going to go through it. But for the rest of the people, when they first come into me, I spend, of the hour we spend together, 45 minutes talking about what went wrong or how are they feeling right now or why are they coming in to see me that day versus coming in 6 months prior or coming in 6 months later. And I try and figure out where they are. Mm-hmm. It's from psychology, it was called motivational interviewing, trying to figure out where the person is and what are they capable of doing. And so I spent a lot of time on that. So I understand that this person number X isn't ready to start talking about solutions right now. They're still processing that they're getting divorced. So don't even talk about solutions. Just try and get them through these next couple of weeks or months. Person Y is so over their past person, they're ready to move on. And so I've got to move things more quickly for them, as opposed to taking each case in. When I've worked for other divorce lawyers, the initial interview is, how much money do you make and what are the assets and who owns the car and how much money did you put down on the house and all those technical things, which we get to, but I don't have to get to it right away for certain people.
Yeah.
And so it's treating their divorce a little bit more sensitively, making it about their experience. And I'll say to them, someone comes in and they've got a simple case. They own a house, they have a 401k, they have 2 cars, and they have a Fidelity investment account. And they don't have any kids. That's an easy divorce. And I'll say to them, legally, this is a very easy case. It's not going to involve anything. I'm not saying this is an easy divorce for you, but we're going to get you through this. And then I refer every one of my clients to a therapist. They don't all take me up on it, but I try and find a therapist near their home who I know does good work to then help them through the process.
That's really nice.
That's awesome because you're not just you're not here to help them with just the legal problem. You're actually helping them with or providing at least a little bit of guidance on all of this process of divorce.
Right. And I'm not doing therapy. I'm not doing that, but I'm treating them in a more therapeutic manner. And I'm not
as a whole and not just going straight for the legal portion of the divorce.
Right. I'm looking at the gestalt. I'm looking at everything that's going on in their life and trying to offer them. I'll have women who are uninvolved in the finances, sort of a stereotypical thing, but they still come in and they say, I don't know what we own. My husband made all the money. He invests all the money. I have no idea. I've never run a budget. All I do is put everything on this American Express Gold card and then it gets paid. And they need a financial advisor who's going to help them budget and figure out how they want to invest. They need someone who's going to hold their hand. And if they just go into Morgan Stanley, that person's not going to do that.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with Morgan Stanley. But the big bank, you're not going to find the sensitive person who can work with them. And so each person has their own puzzle pieces that need filling. This person needs a new accountant. And then putting them with quality people helps them move along much better.
Yeah. Did you find that once you went through your own divorce, did that change anything in what you do when dealing with other people?
I don't. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. I think Well, I definitely know how it changed things. So I tell people that in the first year post-divorce, if you have kids and you've worked out a custody schedule, just leave the custody schedule the way it is. Print it out. Here's the days I have my kids for the next year, and these are the holidays, and this is the vacation I'm going to take. And don't get into negotiating. I'm going to switch you this Saturday for that Sunday. I'm going to switch this Thursday for a Tuesday. Can I take them to the ice capades on this night, even though it's your night? And while that's something to aspire to and eventually get to that point where you can trade things, for me, it was too hard to do that negotiating because I felt during that first year that I was giving up time with my daughters and that somehow they were going to resent me for giving up time to my ex-wife, to their mother. It didn't turn out to be that way. This was all in my head. But by sticking by the rules for the first year, you eventually realize it all works out in the end. And as long as the kids are happy, it doesn't matter whether they spend 49% or 48%, 47.5%, whatever the number is. None of those numbers matter. It's just what works for you.
Right.
And so I loosened up about following. I eventually loosened up about following the strict schedule, but I advise people to just stick with that schedule the first year until you're used to living separately. Your kids are used to going back and forth in between two houses.
It's establishing a new normal. That way you can play with those times and things and negotiate after that. But establish the normal first.
But going right into negotiations after you've just negotiated your breakup and you've negotiated who's keeping the 401k and where you're going to live, it's too much and it's too emotional.
Yeah.
And you're not going to make good decisions.
That's a great point. You almost need that whole year to stabilize.
Right.
Everybody let's get to a place where we can all take a breath and step back, kind of get all the other parts of your life together, right? And do all your charts and graphs and figure out now what friends do we want? Where do we want to live? And that kind of stuff. So that's pretty awesome. You do really bring a whole unique skill set into your practice.
I try to, and it's not always successful. And part of my practice is taking people through child custody evaluations. They're getting divorced. They can't agree on how they're going to divide the children's time. One says the other person has an alcohol problem. The other person says she's hanging around with a creepy boyfriend. Whatever reasons they don't want to equally share or appropriately share their kids, the court sends them to a forensic psychologist to be evaluated. And for those people, I spend a lot of time working with them so that by the time they get to see that psychologist, they've essentially practiced with me and we've honed their story into the best story it can be. Mm-hmm. There's only so much I can do, though. And so, I can practice with them. And if they go in and they revert to who they were before they saw me, there's nothing I can do about that.
Right.
If people aren't ready to make those changes, people are going to be who they're going to be.
Yeah. Wow. So, I'm thinking back to my divorces, which totally different, but
a whole different. You had no kids.
I had no kids. We didn't have anything. I mean, we were young kids and we didn't have anything to really argue about. It's like, do you want this comforter? No. Okay. That was about the extent of it. Get a new one. But what after listening to so many of our guests come through here with some of the problems and struggles that they had going through the divorce, like to have someone like you who has more of a compassionate side, if you will, because I feel like when we're in a specific industry and we know it inside out and we do it every day, it seems so so obvious to us of what the next steps are and how this goes. But to somebody who's in the thick of it and this is their first time doing it, they have no idea. Some of people, like some of the people we've had on here, they didn't even have a checking account in their name before. Like, this is a huge step. So to come to you, someone, like you, who has been on the other side, understands the psychological process, all of that, what a gift to somebody. Right.
It's just knowing my clients on a different level rather than applying what I do as a divorce lawyer to every single person who comes in. Like right now I have a female client who, I call her to her face. She's a hairdryer. If you run a hairdryer too hot and too long, it has an automatic shutoff. If it gets too hot, it turns off. And it's got to cool down and it won't run again for 2 hours or whatever it is. And she's got that circuit. If we get too deep and things get too hot and we start talking about things too deeply, she shuts down and I can't get through to her. And so I told her, you're like a hairdryer. You've got this automatic shut off when you get too hot. So if I feel like we're getting too hot, we're going to pull out and we're going to say, let's pick up again tomorrow. Let's pick up again next week. And I'm only going to take you as far. And if I see you start shutting down, we're going to call it off for that day.
Yeah.
And pick up again another day.
Well, that's really great. That is really good. You're doing good work.
Yeah,
like,
thanks.
I mean, like, not obviously, but beyond that. And I love that you did this book because, like you said, there's a lot of books about people's personal divorce experience, about how to get through it. But when it comes to actually moving on and putting your life back together, what is there? So this is a fabulous resource. Where can our listeners find this?
So it's on Amazon.com. David Glass, Moving On, takes you right to the page. We've got paperback, we've got Kindle. And this is the first week, but it's been selling sort of remarkably well. It went to the Amazon bestseller list on the first day.
Nice.
And so there's definitely a need out there for this sort of book, and people are grabbing out for it, which is very gratifying.
So a great last minute holiday gift for somebody you know, or a great gift for yourself to start the new year off right. Like this would be a great process to start on January 1 and maybe work on some of these things through your first few months.
Well, these are skills for everybody.
Yeah.
Everyone can use that positive, active nature in their lives to try to clean up some of the issues, some of the friends and things that are not beneficial or being positive in their life.
Right. And in fact, I got an email this morning from the therapist who I worked with post-divorce, who I sent a copy of the book to and thanked her again for all the help that she had given me. And she said in her email, I've already read through half the book. It's an amazing book, but it's not just for divorced people.
Right.
If everyone looked at this, they would be much more methodical in figuring out how they're living their lives.
Yeah.
And I just got that email today. That's funny.
So it could almost be breaking up with anything.
Right.
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 Yeah. What about, I'm kind of curious, what about with teenagers?
Teenagers
Have you ever, kind of a side note, but like, I'm just thinking like if people have kids and they're just going through their first breakups and want a better understanding, would any of these exercises somebody would be able to walk through with their kids on doing an assessment?
It's interesting. I've never treated kids. I did a brief internship, a brief rotation with kids and teens and decided it wasn't for me when I was a therapist. But if you can get a teenager to slow things down and think in this methodical way, it definitely works. And educational psychologists use this with kids who aren't doing well in school and trying to figure out what behavior patterns are they in.
Right.
It's the getting your teens to slow down, and sometimes they're not capable of that. And part of the teenage years is also making all sorts of mistakes and learning from those mistakes.
Yeah.
And I remember a professor years and years ago talk about trying on different hats. This week I'm going to be the mean girl at school, and then this week I'm going to be everyone's friend at school, and trying to figure out what works. And so part of being a teenager is making these what seem like colossal mistakes at the time, and a year or two later seem silly and funny and everything else. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how you.
I was just kind of curious because I'm like, boy, if I had this book, if I had learned that kind of process at a younger age, because I was married young,
right?
How would this have changed things?
Right.
Right. Instead of just reacting to things and relationships and learning later in life that, I had some bad behavior.
And in fact, what I've tried to teach my daughters is not to get married too soon.
Good idea.
It's a broad statement, doesn't apply to everyone, but the list of what I was looking for in a partner when I was 26 and got married the first time versus being 41, 42 the second time, the list none of the things came up the same. What I was looking for in a partner and how I wanted to live my life. And that much changes in the 15 years between late 20s and early 40s. And I'm not saying everyone should wait till they're 40 to get married, but maybe not rushing into it right away and waiting till and it happened with me and my ex-wife. We grew apart. We started more similar, but we grew in completely different ways.
Yeah.
And one way really isn't better than the other. It's just two different ways to fit two different people. Yep. And unless you give yourself to grow that way, I think it's harder to make things work. It's not
knowing what you want out of life and what direction you want to go. And sometimes at 26, you don't know that yet.
Right.
No, and you think you know it. I absolutely thought I knew exactly what I was doing, and I had this whole plan. And then guess what? It didn't work out exactly that way.
Right.
But again, that's fine. It's fine that it doesn't work exactly according to plan. You just got to circle around, make a new plan.
Yeah. And I do think your dad really said it so well. And it's not about picking the right person. It's about being that right person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What an awesome conversation to have with you. I'm fascinated by what you're doing and that you put this book together and all the lessons that can be learned from it. And I really appreciate you driving all the way out here and sharing with us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was a great conversation. Thanks for having me on.
This is good. Thank you.